The cornerstones of an offensive line start on that perimeter with offensive tackles. Who are the top 5 offensive tackles in the last decade? We'll discuss all of that next on the Locked On NFL Draft Podcast.
You are Locked On NFL Draft, your daily podcast covering the NFL Draft. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Locked On family? Let's get locked in. Welcome back to the Locked On NFL Draft Podcast, your daily podcast covering your favorite draft prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your boy, Damian Parson, always on the ones and twos. You can find and follow me on Twitter at DP_NFL. I'm a national scout over with the Draft Network, as well as your favorite and local running back guru. And as always, the champ is here, the guy that has the ring that nobody can take from him, my guy, Keith Sanchez, Mr. LSU. You can find and follow him on Twitter at TheTalentCode. Keep talk to him, baby.
What's up, Locked On family? This is Keith Sanchez, senior draft analyst with the Draft Network, man, and DPQ that up, man. 2019 national champ with those LSU Tigers, man. But you know why we're here, man? We're here to bring you championship level content surrounding that NFL draft, right? Whether that's prospects, whether that's draft philosophies, whether that's roster management, whether that's going through the depth charts and telling you who's going to be good and who's not, right? But me and DP, myself, man, we're in this summer, right? So we're having a bit of revisionist history. We're going through, we're revising, we're fine-tuning our scouting skills, right? And we're talking about, hey, some of we're looking at the top 5 offensive tackle prospects, and not guys that got to the NFL and they were great. We're talking about guys that came out of college that we had our highest grades on, and so we're ranking them 1 through 5, right? And then we're going to get into a conversation of the difficulty with scouting the offensive tackle position. Whether you play left tackle, right tackle, can you move to one side of the football, right? Doesn't matter if you're in an air raid offense, right? Do you have to be able to run block really good if you're an offensive tackle? And then the versatility of the position, right? Slide from tackle to guard to tackle, like I just said, playing the left side, the right side. So we're going to get into all this fun conversations because we know this, man, with the edge rushers becoming more and more athletic, right? You know, we got guys like the Bosa brothers putting up 20 sacks in the season. We need people to protect our quarterbacks. And these offensive tackles, I think, is a fun conversation. You don't talk about the offensive line until you need an offensive line. So, DP, let's get into this conversation. Won't you reel off your top 5 offensive tackles over the past 10 years, 1 through 5?
Yes, sir. This was not easy, guys, because there's a lot of talented dudes that have come out of college and a lot of them that meet the height, weight, arm length, requirements. But I'm going to start off at the top. Lane Johnson at number 1. I have Taylor Lewan, number 2. Laramie Tunsil at 3. Andrew Thomas at 4. And Jack Conklin at number 5.
We don't have any of the same guys.
Whoa!
That's
a first.
Yeah, we have one. So I'm going to go, and that's just to this position, right? Like just how difficult it has been, just with these guys, and they are a lot of them drafted. I went Ronnie Stanley 1. Like, and these are guys that came out, and I was like, coming out of college, I thought they were those dudes, right? I went Ronnie Stanley 1. I went Lane Johnson 2. I went Tristan Wirfs 3. I really liked Tristan Wirfs when he came out of Iowa. But see how you made that look, and you was like, oh, man, I forgot that. But that's how I felt with your list, right? I'm hearing names, and I'm like, oh, man, I forgot about him. So I'm going to start over. I went Ronnie Stanley 1, Lane Johnson 2, Tristan Wirfs 3. I went Penei Sewell 4, highly hyped guy out of there. And then recency bias in a sense, but I just really liked this guy. And you knew that, DP. That was Ike Ekwonu, the Carolina Panthers. it was something about Ike that I just gravitated towards, right? And I'm like, I really like this guy. And then honorable mention, and I could have put all of your guys. Mike McGlinchey also was a guy coming out. So I think we only had one crossover name, DP.
Yeah.
And and that was 5. So it's on 9 names, right? That we're talking about with one of the best. So I want to ask you just some names that stood out to you, and you was like kind of like oh man, he was really good. Like when you actually went through it, some names that stood out on my list, or some names that stood out on your list.
Man, of course, like listen, Penei Sewell, him and Penei Sewell was like one of the biggest ones.
Tristan
Stanley too, Tristan Wirfs. Those two were the ones that I don't know how I left off, but it was such a hard choice because of the fact that when you look at, like they said, look at the names that the names I have on my list. Those are extremely talented dudes. And one thing that I realized, right? I'm gonna tell you a name I thought about too, Keith, about the honorable mention was Peter Skoronski. Like just from a technical standpoint, he may be one of the most technically refined tackles that we've seen in recent history. But let me tell you something with Lane Johnson. When we use the term bet on traits, he epitomizes that term. And that, is a former tight end, 6'6", 300 pounds, 35 35 and a quarter on the arms. This man ran 4.7. You know what I mean? He jumped 34 inches, benched almost 30 reps in the bench press. But you've seen what he's developed into. But, a guy that I feel like for me that really stood out was Andrew Thomas, Keith. And a lot of people don't remember, but former Georgia Bulldog, he had a rough rookie year with the Giants. He did not have a great season. He did not have a great season, but he's bounced back, and I'm gonna say this, for Locked On Family, if y'all disagree, holler at us in the comments on YouTube, but let me know. I think this is a year that he's going to put his name in that kind of top tier tackle in the NFL. He's going into that almost that there. I'm not even gonna say near that elite tier, because this young man is extremely talented, toolsy, and I just remember watching him, man. Like at Georgia, of course, I'm a former running back, so I like physical guys. I like guys who move people off the ball, and he did a great job. He was a mauler. He played with an attitude, but he had enough of athleticism in his pass sets and everything else to mirror guys and move laterally and everything and get into his vertical sets. But the strength and everything else that he brought to the table, I was extremely impressed by him just overall.
I really appreciated you bringing the Andrew Thomas conversation, right? Because he was another highly touted prospect, right? When we talk about checking all the boxes from a height, weight perspective, playing at Georgia, playing in the SEC. And it's almost like this shift, right? Because it was so many Bama offensive tackles that were getting drafted, like the top offensive tackle year in and year out. But then now we're starting to see the shift to Georgia offensive tackles with, Andrew Thomas. And then, what we had Isaiah Wilson, I believe. And then you had Broderick Jones also this in this past. And shout out to Broderick Jones, because I think he's going to be one of the better offensive tackles in the NFL. He really gets everything going. But DP, there was a part of that conversation. I'm happy that you brought that up, because it's going to make for a great transition. And that's the difficulty with scouting a position, because you said that Andrew Thomas didn't have a good rookie year, right? And I believe that's when he was playing on the right side of the offensive line. Right, I
believe so.
And then now he's moved over to the left side. I believe it. If I'm wrong, then somebody correct me. But I think he moved positions, and that's a big part of scouting the position, right? Because we think that you can just grab an offensive tackle and place him here and place him there. And I had a really dope conversation with one of the best offensive line coaches, mentors, trainers, and Duke Mayweather. I know a lot of our listeners see him all over Twitter. I was able to go to the offensive line summit with nothing but Hall of Famers and Pro Bowlers and just all the accolades you could think of. And so I want to, as we transition, coming up to the next segment, I want to talk about some of that conversation that we had and just talking about moving from the left side to the right side, and why is it so difficult scouting the offensive line position?
Baseball is in full swing, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, which is America's #1 sports book. Guys, because right now, new customers getting no sweat first bet up to $1,000. Let me repeat myself to make sure you heard me clearly. That's up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. What do you need to do? I'll tell you. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to join today and get started to tap into all the action. Now, if you are a Marlins fan, you're an Atlanta Braves fan, right? You're a Mets or a Yankees fan, you can bet on your teams and do the best and create the best that you like to create with FanDuel. They give you a lot of options and variety, guys. So I'm going to tell you here right now, all you have to do so you don't miss your chance. Like I said, you don't want to miss the chance to snag a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. What do you need to do? Just join FanDuel today. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up, because FanDuel is the official partner of Major League Baseball. Scouting difficulty, Keith, and you kind of hinted at it. With offensive tackle, I'm going to be honest with you. Offensive line may be outside of quarterback, maybe the hardest position to scout and project, because Keith, I'm pretty sure you saw a lot of the names that I did too. When we're looking through the history of offensive tackles drafted, a lot of those guys were playing guard once they got to the league.
Yeah.
right? Like they get you played 4 years at left tackle in college just to get to the NFL, and they say, yeah, no, buddy, you're gonna play left guard for the rest of your career. Yeah, we're not putting you on the outside, man. So for you, Keith, when you're going in, just kind of talk about your scouting, what makes it so difficult when you're scouting offensive tackles? What's the biggest thing that stands out in terms of the difficulty of it?
Yeah, it's difficult because offensive tackles, right? They come in all shapes and sizes, right? And it's just an underdeveloped, I guess, conversational piece, right? Like everybody's a quarterback guru, right? Everybody knows how to, grade a defensive back, right? Everybody knows about wide receivers, but offensive line, it's still the boring position, and it's the position that nobody wants to talk about. Like I said, it's we always say, right, that if you're having a good game, that means nobody's talking about you as an offensive lineman, which is weird, right? Like you just kind of
Right.
fly under the radar. Like nobody knows offensive line play that much. So I think that you get to the point, DP, where a lot of people will say, okay, cool. They're trying to do more measurements. I feel like, 6'6", long wingspan, stuff like that. He should be good. And it's like, that's not necessarily all of the recipe, right? Just stand alone. And I want to, for a couple minutes, DP, just get into this conversation because I said I was going to talk about it. So last summer, I went to the Duke Mayweather Offensive Line Summit, right? And it was my first like real exposure because obviously my time at LSU, talk offensive line play, stuff like that, but just into the details of playing the offensive line position. And even when people hear that, right, they think about scheme, right? Like, oh, I know offensive line play, gap, zone, reach, block, you know what I'm saying? Cut off block, like working to the second level. But like, no, there was like real like hand techniques. There was hand maneuvers, and they were talking about quick setting people and getting on them fast and closing the distance, closing the space. And you just had all these different perspectives, man. And you're talking about some of the best ever do. You're talking about Willie Roaf, you're talking about Willie Allen, you're talking about Alan Faneca, right? Then you're talking about guys that's playing this year. Lane Johnson got up there and talked. Teron Armstead was up there having a conversation. Trey Smith from the Kansas City Chiefs, Creed Humphrey. So and that was probably only 10% of the names that I like. I'm talking, it was so many names, but you just heard them talk. And I'm gonna tell you the one position, DP, that it reminded me of. Defensive back, because they talked about mirroring the defensive end in hand usage, right? Not shooting with two hands and then using your inside leverage, you know what I'm saying? Your inside arm with the press, right? So that way, if they knock it down and counter, you can come back with the outside arm, right? And be able to counter. It reminded me of defensive back play. Like I was sitting there listening, and I'm like, this is the same technique that defensive backs use. So I thought that was so interesting when I was able to sit there and listen. But I think, DP, when you asked me, what are you looking for in the offensive lineman? My couple, and they've adjusted, right? As you win more, you lose a couple, you win more, you lose a couple, you start to adjust your rank, just your traits, right? And it's range. You have to be a good athlete. You have to have range when blocking. I'll say this, as much as we just like to get the biggest offensive lineman in the world, those guys weren't fat. Lane Johnson is not a fat guy. He's a big guy, right? Like it's like you're talking about Shaquille O'Neal when he played for the Magic, not Shaq when he played for the Cavaliers and finished, right? Because you still have to be good athletes. Like you're blocking and staying in front of one of the better, like the one of the best positions, right? You're talking about defensive end, 6'4", 6'5", runs 4.4. You know what I'm saying? Strong also. So they have to be good athletes. I look for the natural strength that they have, and then well-proportioned bodies. I don't want top-heavy guys. I want guys that have well-proportioned bodies, so that way they can have a good base, a good anchor to be able to anchor down on bull rush, but also a good base to where they can move laterally. So that's just some of the things that I try to look for in the offensive tackle.
It's funny that you brought up defensive back, because I remember tweeting this out a while ago, and I've been talking about it for years, and I'm glad that we're on the same page. Offensive tackles are like all the cornerbacks of the offensive line. These are the only two positions in football where they tell you retreat versus a much better athlete. Like, and you do it by yourself. Like you don't have, you don't have typically. Yeah, you could chip a Von Miller and stuff like that. Yeah, you could put a safety over the top or on the inside, you know what I mean, to try and bracket. But in that contact window, it's you and that receiver. Same thing with the tackles. It's you and Von Miller. It's you and Myles Garrett. And like you talked about, the difficulty of it is like, yeah, you may, and I think I hate to use competition sometimes, Keith, but it does matter, because it's different going from playing at South Florida or UCF, where you're not seeing a high caliber edge rusher, to being drafted in the AFC North, and now you got to see T.J. Watt and Myles Garrett. You know what I mean?
Right,
And
right,
Myles
yeah,
Garrett is a different animal than most pass rushers in the NFL. This guy can slide down a 3-tech and be a 12-sack defensive tackle if he wanted to.
I would say no, that's true, DP, and that's why these kind of like not all-star events, but kind of like these bowl events like the Senior Bowl and the Shrine and the NFLPA, all of those things. It's good to see those smaller school guys because you get to finally see them against the higher level competition before you have to draft them, right? And you take notes. Like our guy from ULL, the offensive tackle, I'm blanking on his name. He plays for the New York Jets now, and I had a pretty high grade on him based off of film. And he did play Texas and he played Iowa State, right? But then when I watched him at the Senior Bowl, I started to see, I'm like, okay, I think there's a clear difference in between like his functional strength versus some of these better D1 football players. So I agree to you, DP, that competition and who you go up against does matter in the evaluation, because you're talking about guys like that. I mean, when I list all 6'6", 250 pounds, like that sounds like LeBron James, right? Like these are high caliber athletes. Like Chase Young is a freak of an athlete, right? Then Von Miller just comes with a totally different array and skill set. And then sometimes you never know, you kick guys like JJ Watt outside, right? And I know he's retired, but they kick him outside, and then now you have to handle that 6'5", 300 pounds coming at you that's strong as a bull. So it's just so many different dynamics to the offensive tackle position.
No, 100%. I think one of your biggest points that I wanted to highlight as well is just like you said, you said the discussion is unrefined. The players coming out are unrefined. These guys are just being big, long arm athletes and everything and being physical. Then you get to the league and you face a TJ Watt, who's one of the more refined pass rushers with his hands and his movement skills and how to deconstruct blocks and his pass rush plan. And it goes two ways, right? Because the college edge rusher typically is doing the same thing. They're just rushing. They don't typically have a plan a lot of times. These guys are just, man, I'm a bull in the China shop. I'm 6'3", 6'4", 250, 260. I run a 4.4. I'm strong. I got, a 7'2" wingspan or something crazy, like whatever it is. And I just know how to, like a Derek Hall, right? He didn't have a lot of moves, but he was aware of it. But what was his go-to? That long arm. Because he knew I play that half man and I strike you in the middle of your chest plate and I can control you and get around. But when guys like played on that and sat on that move, he didn't have counters, right? But he's aware of it, and so he's working on it. But that's the other part too, is like a lot of these tackles, what makes it hard with scouting and projection is like, well, okay, yeah, you might, even in the SEC, you see a lot of high caliber athletes and toolsy edge rushers, but these guys aren't refined. So then the first year, like an Andrew Thomas, why did he struggle? It's a different ball game going to the league, because now you got to get your technical game at that level to match your physicality and your physical profile, because now you're going up against guys that can legitimately rush the passer. They know how to throw move after move. They know how to reset their hands. They don't just attack the outside. They know how to counter inside, all that type of stuff, man. So when you talk about just the difficulty of scouting a position, I think that plays a part in it too. Is just everybody is unrefined. The O-line and the D-line.
And that goes to, and we about to transition, DP, but that goes into sometimes the scheme that they're playing in too, right? Like we're talking about these air raid offenses where like for example, the easiest, I think what the quickest one in recent memory was Charles Cross, right? Was because playing at Mississippi State, it was a lot of quick game. It was a lot of, okay, just drop back. It was like you had multiple questions, like, can this guy run block? Like, how big is he? Remember, everybody would question, like, how much weight, like, what does he weigh? Things like that. And then it was like, okay, can he anchor? But it was like, it was so like the Mississippi State offense, right? With with Mike Leach, rest in peace to Mike Leach. It was just one of those things that you just didn't know, because it was like this air raid, and you see that a lot with, and it's kind of the same thing with the Big 12 wide receivers. It's kind of been that with the Big 12 offensive tackles, right? Like there have been some big names that come out of the Big 12, and it's been like, okay, is the offense necessarily helping me get the best read and grade on this offensive tackle to be able to project them to the NFL, DP? And listen, man, and we're going to talk about coming up next, man. We're going to talk about one of the I guess the biggest parts, right? And that's versatility. Versatility is key for success. You hinted at this at the very beginning of the podcast. You said you went through a lot of these offensive tackles and now they're playing guard, right? They're playing guard in the NFL. And so we always want tackles, but guards are also important. But we want to get into the versatility, right? Like what allows you to be versatile. And then I know you put up here, you said versatility is key. So I'm more than sure you have a statement that you're trying to make. You have something that you're hinting upon. So coming up next, man, we're going to get into the versatility of the position and why versatility is key with offensive tackles.
Guys, you know my slogan. The more you can do, the better. Like, it's just simple as that. And especially on the offensive line, because of the fact of the matter is, not everybody's going to play tackle. As Keith just kind of talked about in the tease of this segment, as I talked about earlier, I looked at some of those names, guys, and I'm like, man, he's not even playing tackle no more. Like, he got to the league and he was thrusted inside at guard immediately. But I even, like, and not just with the offensive tackle, just O-line in general, Keith, I even go back real quick to, this was good maybe 7 years ago. The New England Patriots had drafted out of, I think it's Florida State, I think it's Brian Stork, a center. And at the time, I think middleweight, they played the Giants, I think, in that season, and their right tackle got hurt. They kicked it. He was so versatile. He not only could he play guard, they kicked him and he played the rest of the game at right tackle. So, like, to talk about the value of being able to move guys around, and when you think about a Peter Skoronski, right? We talked about it leading up to the 2023 NFL draft. He may not have the best arm length, but I'm going to try him at tackle in practice anyway. I'm going to see if he can do it. His former teammate, Rashawn Slater, did it. We've seen Isaiah Wynn did it. We've seen other kind of shorter, non-traditional tackles do it.
Jamari Sawyer for the Chargers, right? I think he played.
Everybody said he was a guard.
Yeah, everybody says he's a guard, but he can hold up. But then this is the thing, you know that he can play guard at that size, right? And I agree with you, DP, that when you're talking about building a roster, building a good offensive line, you want as many pieces as possible. I even think about the New Orleans Saints with them drafting Andrews Pete, right? And then they had to play, I think they played him at offensive tackle for a couple of seasons, then eventually kicked him down to guard and was like, hey, we'll, no, he came in as a guard, because I think that's when Teron Armstead was still there. But you know that he can play offensive tackle also because of his time at Stanford. So I look at that, DP, and I agree with you, because when it comes to the offensive line position, and this was something that Mark Schlereth talked about, right, was that they operate in synchronicity. You know what I'm saying? That like all of them have to be on the same page. And sometimes you can't really relate to, the person next to you until you've walked in their shoes, right? So, the left tackle will now know what the left guard needs. The left guard will know what the left tackles need. The guards will know what the center needs. You know what I'm saying? And just different looks and, okay, how you going to handle this and how I can best help you with this situation, or, what may be most difficult. Because even when you're talking about in the run game, DP, we talk so much pass pro, right? But there's this communication that doesn't happen between the guard and the tackle, or the guard and the center, when we're talking about double teams and working to the second level. And that's simply a feel. So we're talking about moving at high speeds, right? And we're trying to block somebody, and we have to be on the same page as far as a feel together. So that's why I think it's so important to play different positions, so that way they can kind of understand, what that other person may be seeing or feeling, and just kind of getting to know your teammate better.
No, 100%. I think, me, I always have my football to basketball analogies. In the NBA nowadays, the phrase is positionless basketball. And sometimes you kind of want that for offensive line too. You want guys that, hey man, if my left guard is out, I have a tackle on my team that can play guard, and we don't miss a beat, right? Or if my tackle's out, I would like to have a guard who has tackle, has a history at tackle. So if I need to slide him out like a Jamari Salyer, he can get us out of a pinch, and not even out of a pinch. Jamari Salyer got them out of multiple games, if I remember correctly. He was one of the better graded tackles or offensive linemen in 2022 per PFF.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I want to get to the other side of that, DP, is I guess the conversation, because like the Evan Neal conversation, right? When we're talking about those guys that potentially can't play both positions, or you're hurting them by putting them in different positions. And I think that's a great conversation to have too, because so many times we draft these guys, right? And Evan Neal played his best football at left tackle for Alabama, right? And then he gets drafted to the Giants, and now he's playing right tackle, and he looks like the player that was the year before that he had more of a second-ish round grade on versus a top 10 pick. And so there's the other part of that. And I think that while versatility is Crean, I think is true, and I think it's so important, but you also have to figure out, okay, how to construct this thing best, right? Like, where am I putting, especially if you drafting guys top 10, right? Like you need to know if this guy just necessarily fits. So that may be a situation, DP, where another offensive lineman may have fit more for the New York Giants than Evan Neal. You know what I'm saying? Because you what are you going to do now? Like, are you going to kick Evan Neal back to the left side and switch Andrew Thomas? You're probably not going to do that because you have two guys that you drafted with top 10 grades, and you're trying to figure it out with one. You know what I'm saying? So I think that's the ideal thing. Is just, you, like, with the evaluation process, you really have to identify everything and hit everything with a fine tooth comb, however they say that. You got to go through that.
No, I agree with you. And that was something I thought about too, Keith, as we get ready to close, is I thought about that Giant situation and having Andrew Thomas and then getting Evan Neal. And I'm like, I don't know how well this is going to work. Because I remember when you presented Evan Neal, you was like, listen, he's better at left tackle than right. And I'm like, oh man, this doesn't sound good if you draft him and throw him to the right side, right? Like,
Right.
At the end of the day, it's like, you can't, if you got a tackle problem at both sides, you don't draft two left tackles. Like, that doesn't really make sense. And I think it was Carmen Vitale, shout out to our girl Carmen, she talked about, and she's really close and worked well with, in Tampa Bay with the offensive line, and covering that team. And she talked about how it's such a misnomer that people say, hey, you could just flip a guy to the opposite side of the formation. And she's like, no, like muscle wise and movement skill, like it takes a while to build that muscle memory up. And if you're playing a guy immediately on the opposite side that he's used to playing, it causes some issues. So I think this is a really in-depth, fun conversation, guys. And I hope that you guys learn a lot from us, because at the end of the day, this is what it is. Offensive line, offensive tackle, you want to be versatile, but there's difficulty in scouting this position. And there always has been, there always will be, as body types change, guys keep continue to grow and get bigger and get more athletic. But we had, like I said, we had a lot of fun, guys. So as always, go subscribe and follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to get the latest episode as soon as it's available. Thank y'all for making Locked On NFL Draft your first listen today and every single day. On tomorrow's show, we're going to get into the edge rushers, guys. So we're going to look into the
defensive side of the football, baby.
Defense wins championships. I don't care what they tell you. Defense wins championships. All right. So, you know what I mean? You need a good defense. So you need guys that can make plays. And we're going to get it. And we just talked about offensive tackles. We're going to get into those guys that put pressure on them off the edges and look at the top 5 edge rushers over the last 10 years, right? Keep the decade, the flashback, right? Keep the flashback going with these episodes. But as always, guys, like I said, in terms of Twitter, you can find and follow Keith Sanchez at The Talent Code. You can find and follow me, Damian Parson, at DP_NFL. Come and join the conversation again tomorrow on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.